On the border of Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo lies the vast and beautiful Lake Albert. For centuries, its waters have been a lifeline for the communities along its shores, a source of food, transport, and connection. But on March 22, 2014, this source of life became the scene of an unimaginable tragedy, a day that would forever be etched in the memory of the region. It was a Saturday, a day that should have been filled with hope in the simple joys of travel. A large wooden boat, laden with passengers, set off from the Hoima district in Uganda, its destination the Oriental province in DR Congo. Many on board were refugees, Congolese nationals who had been living in Uganda and were now returning home, filled with anticipation of reuniting with loved ones and rebuilding their lives. Others were traders and ordinary travelers, all sharing the same vessel, the same journey across the shimmering waters of Lake Albert. But as the boat moved further from shore, a sense of unease began to grow. The vessel was dangerously overcrowded. Designed to carry perhaps 100 people, it was packed with well over 300 men, women, and children. They were squeezed together, surrounded by their luggage and merchandise. This wasn't an uncommon sight on these waters, where regulations are often overlooked and economic necessity forces people to take immense risks. But on this particular day, that risk would have fatal consequences. As the journey progressed, the weather, which can change in an instant on a large lake like Albert, took a turn for the worse. Strong winds began to whip across the surface, churning the calm water into treacherous waves. The overloaded boat, already unstable, was no match for the sudden squall. It began to rock violently from side to side. Panic erupted. Passengers were thrown against each other as the boat listed heavily. And then, in a terrifying, chaotic moment, the vessel capsized. Itipe d'Aubert, spilling its hundreds of passengers and all their belongings into the deep, turbulent water. The scene was one of absolute horror. People who had been dreaming of home just moments before were now fighting for their lives. The cries for help were swallowed by the wind and waves. Many couldn't swim. The weight of their clothing and the chaos of the situation pulled them under. Children, who made up a significant portion of the passengers, were especially vulnerable. In the middle of the vast lake, with no immediate help in sight, survival was a desperate, terrifying struggle against the elements. Rescue efforts were launched as soon as word of the disaster reached the authorities, but the scale of the tragedy was overwhelming. Local fishermen, Ugandan marine police, and civilian volunteers rushed to the scene in their own boats. They pulled whomever they could from the water, their heroic efforts a small light in an immense darkness. But for so many, it was too late. The teams worked tirelessly, navigating the debris field, but with each passing hour, the hope of finding more survivors dwindled. As the recovery operation continued over the next few days, the true, heartbreaking toll of the disaster became clear. Officials initially reported dozens of deaths, but that number climbed steadily as more bodies were recovered from the lake. The final count was staggering. An estimated 251 people lost their lives in the capsizing. Among them were many, many children. Only around 45 people were rescued. The survivors were left with the physical and emotional scars of their ordeal, haunted by the memory of losing family members and friends right before their eyes. In the aftermath, questions and grief hung heavy in the air. How could this have happened? The primary cause was clear to everyone: severe overcrowding. The boat was carrying more than double its intended capacity. This, combined with the sudden burst of bad weather, created a recipe for disaster. Investigations pointed to a systemic failure: the lack of regulation and enforcement on the lake, the economic pressures that push people onto unsafe vessels, and the absence of adequate safety measures like life jackets all contributed to the tragedy. The boat's owner was arrested, but this single action couldn't address the deep-rooted issues that made such a disaster almost inevitable. For the communities around Lake Albert, the grief was profound. Entire families were wiped out. The Congolese refugees who were so close to returning home had their dreams tragically cut short. The Ugandan shore, which had been their temporary home, became the site of their final, heartbreaking farewell. Funerals were held, and the shores that once bustled with life and trade were now quiet with mourning. The 2014 Lake Albert boat disaster is a stark reminder of the dangers that millions of people face every day when relying on informal, unregulated water transport. It is a story that has been repeated on lakes and rivers across Africa and other parts of the world. These aren't just statistics. They are human lives, each with a story, a family, and a future that was stolen. The victims were not just passengers on a boat. They were mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters. They were people seeking a better life, returning home, or simply trying to make a living. Following the tragedy, there were calls for stricter regulations and better enforcement. Ugandan and Congolese authorities pledged to work together to improve safety on the lake. They spoke of mandatory passenger manifests, routine vessel inspections, and ensuring the availability of life-saving equipment. While some improvements have been made, the challenge remains immense. The vastness of the lake makes comprehensive monitoring difficult, and the economic realities for both operators and passengers often lead to old, dangerous habits resurface. The memory of the 251 people who died on March 22, 2014, serves as a powerful call to action. It compels us to demand better safety standards, to hold authorities accountable, and to never forget the human cost of negligence. Their story is a tragedy, but it must also be a catalyst for change, ensuring that the waters of Lake Albert can once again be a true source of life, not a place of sorrow. It's a powerful lesson in how a combination of human factors, negligence, and a lack of oversight can collide with the power of nature to create an unimaginable catastrophe. The waves have long since calmed, but for the families of the victims and the survivors, the storm of grief and loss continues. Remembering them is the first step toward honoring their lives and working to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. Thank you for watching. If you found this story important, please consider subscribing for more in-depth looks at events that have shaped our world. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.